Aloha! Okay, so I'm going to continue with my story. So, um, Carlo, who's now my husband of almost 20 years. So, Carlo and I, we dated all through school. And after about 10 years, we got married. Okay, and it was during that time of shortly after, as I said, shortly after we graduated, we dove deep into our spirituality, and we discovered breathwork and meditation, and we became teachers, and we used to volunteer teach for a huge organization. And we traveled all over the world, studying, learning, volunteering, teaching, guru chasing, all the stuff, studying the Vedas. And then after 10 years of being together, we got married, and then about a year later, our first son was born, and he was born early. I developed some complications, and I had to have an emergency C-section. And he was born, and he was fine. He was little, so he had to. He was very healthy, and I'm so grateful for that. But nursing a preemie and having a preemie in the NICU is just, well, you're not allowed to, stay at the hospital. I mean, you're allowed to stay in the NICU as long as you want, but you can't. But you're also recovering from a C-section. I feel like the whole thing, just like the model, just doesn't. It doesn't really work very well for families, you know what I mean? So there isn't necessarily a place for you to pump either, right? And I needed to pump, so he had extra milk, so that when I was at home sleeping, they could feed him, because he was like on a 3-hour feeding schedule. So all of that was just a lot. Nobody could have prepared me for that. Never in my wildest dreams did I think. I had so much ego, Never in my wildest dreams did I think I was going to have a C-section. Like, I remember taking the baby course, and when they were covering that section, I was just like, I don't even need to listen, because that's not going to be me. I was so convinced it wasn't going to be me. So much ego. I had a midwife, and it's just that's life, isn't it? Like, things just don't always go as planned. But 2 months after William, so he was in the hospital for about a month, and then we brought him home, and we knew, like, we were already starting to set things up that we were going to be leaving Canada for Hawaii. So in Canada, when you have a baby, okay, you qualify for 1 year off, to be off for a year. And to my sisters here in the US, it's like, I know that's not the case here, right? Because I went through the same thing with my second and third child. But so in Canada, you get 1 year off paid, and the first 3 months are for the mother. It's called like maternity leave, and then the other 9 months are parental leave that the husband and wife can split how they see fit. And there's a reason why breastfeeding rates are much, why breastfeeding is more prevalent, and why people breastfeed longer in Canada than they do for the US, because you're set up for it better, right? So but anyhow, I was self-employed in Canada, so I actually did not qualify for maternity leave. So Carlo took it all, but I had to be home anyway, right? But I was like a freelance consultant. I had my own practice. So, but I couldn't go back to work, right? So at least not for a little bit. I was recovering from a C-section. But what's crazy is so Carlo took the leave, right? So it was beautiful, because him and I were off at the same time, and he was helping me take care of our little baby while I was also recovering. He was able to drive me to the hospital. And I know a lot of couples, I saw it firsthand, that they don't have that same, they're not able to do that. And I think that's one thing I just like really admire about Carlo, is that it was such a no-brainer for him, because as I said, like, our son wasn't due for another like 6.5 weeks. So 7 weeks prior to my due date, all of a sudden I got very ill, and it was a no-brainer. Like, he came to the hospital. I was working at a client site 2 hours away. He just like dropped everything, grabbed the dogs on the way. His parents lived an hour away. He went, dropped the dogs off, and then made his way to the client site. And or to the hospital, because I literally like took a cab by myself to the hospital. And that in itself was such a huge learning experience for me. By the time my second child came, I knew that wasn't going to be my story again. I wasn't going to be like, pushing so hard, But as first time moms, we just don't know. We just don't know. We don't know any better. We think we can just do as much as we're doing before we're pregnant, and sometimes I think we forget that we're growing a human. And that takes so much of our energy. So I ended up in the hospital. Carlo came once, and the hospital already knew that I think that I was going to have a preemie. So I was really pushing to be relocated to our hometown, which was 2 hours away, or not our hometown, our home to Carlo and I, where we were living, because we were living in the university town where we had gone to school. We just stayed there after the fact. So we ended up. I ended up being transported. My son was born anyhow, and then we ended up with him at home. But already in the works was this whole idea that we would be moving to Hawaii, because there was already a project that I was pitching myself for. And the reason I was pitching myself for that project was because, yes, of course, because it's Hawaii. I mean, hello, it's Hawaii, but also because my brother lived here. My brother was a really good tennis player, and he had come to Hawaii from Canada on a full scholarship to play tennis. So he was here, and while I had been consulting before I got married, before I had children, sometimes it's like I used to fly to work, to wherever my client site was in the US or on the west coast of Canada in Vancouver, and I had kept a corporate apartment there. And instead of flying home back to Ontario for the weekend, sometimes I used to fly to go see my brother, and the clients would always pay as long as it was less than the return ticket home, and it typically was from the West Coast. So I had been to Hawaii, I had seen it, loved it, still do. And so I pitched myself for a project, and after our son was born, that was kind of in the works, but we decided to just take a leap of faith. And because we were both off, we decided to just come to Hawaii for a 3-month stint. We locked up the doors of our brand new home that we had finished building. We'd built a really nice home. We were actually in a reality TV show while we built it called Building the Home of Your Dreams. And funny story, this house was not the house of our dreams. On the show I even said, when I realized that was the name of the show, because that was the one question. They're like, hey, so what do you think about building the home of your dreams? And I'm like, oh, is that the name of the show? We didn't realize it. I said, for us, this is really more the home of our reality, because we had really built it on a budget. And it was a nice house. It was a really nice house. But anyhow, we hardly lived in it at all and that's kind of the story for Carlo and I, is that sometimes the mana, the shakti, the prana, the energy within our life, it just moves, and we need to move with it, and we go. And so we locked up the house, and we took out a loan from our the HELOC, the equity line of credit against the home, and we just flew to Hawaii. My brother met us. He picked us up. I had found a place on Craigslist, and he just went and paid for the rent for us, and we told him we would pay him when we got to Hawaii, and we did. So we landed. He picked us up. And in a way, kind of the rest is history. We just started, we lived here, and then slowly we transitioned. We said, we're coming here for 3 months. If things work out with work, then we stay. If they don't, we go back. And I got the contract, and I started working full time. At first, I actually, maybe some of you are wondering, well, how could you afford it? Because obviously you can't keep borrowing against your house. So Carlo was off, so we were receiving a paycheck from his work. And then I also had a client that I had already had, that when I went into the hospital with William. So I just continued to work for that client. And then and I worked for them remotely from Hawaii, because that was the only, they weren't they weren't happy about it. And, you know, it's like the corporate world, you know, it gets such a bad rap, and that's for a reason. So like here I was in the hospital with my son, and I mean, I can't really blame them, but that client was already interviewing to replace me. That's how, you know, there's no job security in a way when you're a consultant. And my friend ended up telling me about it. You know, here I am all hooked up on, you know, IVs and anti-seizure medication, and they're trying to replace me, which I get, but it's still really harsh, right? And so I came out of the hospital, and then William came out, right? And the day he came out, I went back to work for that client, okay? Why? Because they couldn't find anybody else. And that was such a huge compliment to me. And what's interesting is they tried renegotiating my rate to 50%. They said, because you're working from home, and this was all done through a headhunter, so you don't like negotiate with the client directly. There is an intermediary, the headhunter, who's supposed to be representing me in my best interest, but that wasn't always the case. So I really learned about having to like toe the line and really stand up for myself. So they tried renegotiating the rate to 50% because they said I was working from home. So 50% of my hourly rate, they were going to pay me 50% of that. And I said, there's no way. There's no way. I went down on my rate a little bit because I no longer had travel expenses. I didn't have to, you know, keep a corporate apartment in Toronto anymore. But I was not willing to settle for less than that. So I stuck to my guns, and you know what? They ended up paying me what I asked, and that was just yet another lesson, you know, in worthiness and just knowing your worth. And that's, you know, that's the funny thing. That's what I will tell you as a side note. So like the name of my program, my signature paid program, it's called Stepping Into Your Power. Okay. And there's so many beautiful pieces to that program, and they've all been woven together from all these different stories and my life experiences. And one part of the program is about worthiness and really connecting and really working on your own worthiness. And I tell you that piece itself and the program for that reason alone is worth its weight in gold. Because if you buy this program and if you can just work on that piece of yourself, that worthiness piece, you'll make your money back. And that consulting gig of mine, that's just like one example of how that, you know, how that manifests in your life. Because if you don't fully value yourself, if you don't fully understand your worth, then if you don't understand your worth, and if you can't see your worth, then other people will not see your worth, and they will not value you, and that pattern will continue to show up in your life, because that's how life works. And I mean, that's really inner work, right? Is seeing those patterns and finally being sick of them and saying, okay, I'm going to do something about it. Okay, so this is your invitation to do something about it. If you're resonating with that message, if you're like, I think that might be me a little bit, then check out my Stepping Into Your Power signature program. It's 18 videos, 4 bonus videos, over 4 hours of running time, 2 workbooks. You will be taught my sacred breathwork and meditation practice. Okay. And what's beautiful about it is it's a piece of work that I channeled through completely unexpectedly. So most traditional breathwork and meditation practices, and I've studied from multiple traditions, they're 20 minutes. Okay. But the program I teach, and this is what I was led to create, is a shorter breathwork and meditation practice, and it only takes about 5 to 8 minutes. Okay. And in addition to that, then the other piece that I was guided to create is a mantra meditation that you choose yourself. So I work with your unique vibration because I'm all about empowering humans to really step into their power and be the authors of their own journey, be the authors of their own life, right? So part of that is, so in other yogic traditions, the mantra is typically chosen for you by the teacher. And I've done this course twice, okay, from 2 different traditions, and neither of my mantras resonated with me. It just didn't have that deep resonance that I was hoping it would, okay? And And also, I mean, these programs were quite the investment, right? Quite the, like multiple three figures, okay, multiple three figures between Carlo and I, because the second one we took, I think actually both of them we took at the same time. The second one, it was over $1,000 for the two of us, and it's not a long course, okay. I think it's like a 2 or 3 day course. It's really not long, and it didn't resonate with me, so that kind of felt like a little bit of a letdown. So when I was guided to create a meditative practice that allows me to work with my client for them to feel empowered and for them to choose a mantra that has that strong intuitive hit of heck yes, this is for me, this I deeply resonate with, I knew that was that was really the right direction to go in. So that's another piece of the program that I absolutely love. So if you want more info on that, that's at www.thrives.com. And the name of the program is called, I think it's called Self-Study Power. Look for the word power. And I think the URL is power, but you'll definitely find it on my website as soon as you get there. It's www.thrives.com. And if you can't find it, DM me and I'll send you the offer page for that. I'll send you the link to the offer page, okay? And you can find more info on it there. Okay, so now getting back to my story. Okay, so hang on, let me just get some water. Okay, so we had this one little baby and we decided that's it, we're going to Hawaii. So we came to Hawaii, got into a rental space for 3 months, and we said, okay, if within those 3 months we can secure that contract that I had been working on, then we stay. If not, we go back. Okay, so I ended up securing the contract, went to work full time. Carlos stayed home with baby, and things were working. I mean, on the one hand, they were great. Oh my gosh, we're in Hawaii. Do you believe it? We lived at a resort. First, we lived at a hotel, like a full service, beautiful, beautiful hotel. Then we asked to move into a condo, and I negotiated fiercely again. Yay me. Make sure we had a cleaning lady so that I felt supported. Make sure we had a food budget. Make sure we had plane tickets home every month if we wanted them for all of us as a family. Okay. And so it was sweet. It was a sweet, sweet time. Carlos stayed home. He got into photography. He really got to bond with his son. And I worked, and then I would come home for lunch, come home for dinner, and nurse baby, go back to work. Okay, it was just a really nice time for us. And then we had our second son. Okay, and it was by the time, so 2 years later, we had our second son. And I remember with our second son, so my first son, I had an emergency C-section, and I did not want that again. I didn't want a preemie, because nursing a preemie, I joke that, like in my line of work, and also like you listen to the other parts of my story, I've gone through some heavy shit, okay? But I tell you, nursing a baby and not being able to nurse a baby successfully was way harder than a lot of those other things I had gone through, including managing like multi-million-dollar projects. I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating, and that's really, that's to make any of the mamas listening who struggle or who struggled with nursing or raising a baby, just to put things in perspective for you and for you to feel empowered versus disempowered about that part of your life. Like it's a lot. Nursing a child's a lot. Being able to get the proper latch and being able to have that child nurse properly, like some of us struggle, like we really, really struggle. And I understand that. I see you and I understand you. Okay. So now I nursed him for about 10 and a half months, and then we were done. We were just done. It not like, oh, I'm done, but it was just more, I think, it felt like he was done. Like he wasn't really, interesting to explain. Yeah, like it was just, anyhow, so it just felt like the two of us were done with that. And, okay, so moving on, so then I had my second son, and I didn't want that to be my story, so I started looking for a midwife, like as soon as I was pregnant, like within a day, I'm making all the phone calls because I needed to find somebody, because this was in, early, like 2006, and I was looking for somebody who was willing to do a home birth for a VBAC, And a lot of midwives didn't want to do it. They did not want to touch that. They did not want to do a vaginal birth after a C-section at home. And I found one that was, and I felt really grateful to her. Okay. So then that was quite the birth and the delivery. So I continued to work like right up to my, I thought I was actually going to work longer, but I went into labor 3 weeks prior to my due date. So I was full term, 37 weeks on the dot, went into labor, was going to labor at home. And it was a lot. Like, bless my friend who lived next door, who was a Lomi Lomi massage therapist. So she had been doing body work with me because I really I resonate with that, and I wanted somebody who could support me. Like, I was still working, and it was actually at this time, I should add that it was shortly before this, or maybe it was like a year. Yeah, after about a year of Carlo staying home with our youngest, my client discovered that Carlo had the similar skill set to me, and they jumped on it. They wanted him. And the more he said no, because he was home with the baby, the more they persisted. They're like, we need you, because the skill set that him and I have is so unique on this island that they wanted us, and they were willing to pay for it. And they were a really sweet client, a sweet university to work for, so we didn't mind. They were very family oriented. And so finally, they agreed to let us split our time between working from home and working on site. And that just wasn't done back then. But they allowed us to have that arrangement so that they could have the skill set that they required. So that really, our practice really took off after that. It provided the financial security and the financial means that we really needed. And we were grateful for that, because one of us was always home with our son. And the odd time that they weren't, then I had a friend watch him. And then we had our second son. So I went into labor So my friend, Denise, was working on me. And I had this thought that she's supposed to be at my birth. And I remember I brought it up to her, and she said, She said, I didn't want to say anything, but I had a dream that, yes, I was at your birth and I saw your son being born. So she was just next door. So the plan was, even though I had a midwife, that she was going to come and do body work on me. And OMG, am I ever grateful to her that she did. Because this is what was interesting, was that, so let me just back up. I didn't necessarily want a home birth. I was scared of a home birth. But every time I sat down to meditate, the message that kept coming through, and really my meditation was more, I was meditating because I wanted to have a better breastfeeding experience. And so I would meditate, and we live in a beautiful place on Oahu. We live out in the country. Our house looks out at the ocean, at the Pacific Ocean. But behind us, we actually live at the base of a beautiful mountain range, and there is a valley. And when it rains, there are waterfalls that come down the mountain. So I would do this meditation. I would sit down, and I just so deeply desired to have a better breastfeeding experience with my second child that I would sit down, I would close my eyes, and I would meditate, and I would picture milk, because I struggled with milk supply with our first. So I was just picturing just all this milk flowing as the waterfall. So that's what I was sitting down to do. And I remember one time I innocently asked, in my meditation, I asked, where am I supposed to birth this baby? And the answer that came through is, you're supposed to birth this baby at home. And it scared me, because I thought, oh my gosh, we're so far from the nearest hospital. Really? So the next day I asked the same question. Where am I to birth this baby? The answer, at home. And I ended up trusting, and it's kind of crazy, but I ended up trusting that, okay, so the baby's going to be born at home. So I had a midwife, and then I engaged Denise as well, the Lomi Lomi massage therapist. She was not a doula, okay? And she came and she worked on me. And what did it mean she worked on me? Every time I had a contraction, I would have back labor, and I would also have front labor. And I've since learned that that's actually quite normal if you've had a C-section and you have a scar. So the pain was excruciating. And I remember being so humbled because I thought, oh my gosh, I had so much ego around epidurals, because I'm like, oh, epidurals are not for me. And I had so much judgment around people who had epidurals, and I'm so sorry for that now. And so anytime, this is what was so magical. Anytime I had a contraction, the pain was unbearable. That's how it felt. It felt unbearable. And I knew that had I been in a hospital, I would have asked for an epidural. But every time Denise put her hands on me, and she put her hands on my back, okay? And she put her hand like this on my pubic bone, because that's what was pulling apart, right? She put her hands like this on me, and she took my pain away. And it was the craziest thing ever. Now, Denise comes from a lineage of Cherokee Indian healers. And her grandma did tell her that one day she would heal with her hands. And she has since become a doula, and she continues to give like the most incredible Lomi Lomi massages ever. And, but she would take my pain away. And then she would take her hands off because she had a baby that she had to nurse. So her husband would bring the baby, she'd nurse the baby, and my husband would try to do it, and she showed him exactly how to do it, and he couldn't do it. And so she helped me 30 hours. The midwife was already, talking about transporting me to the hospital. I could hear her whispering, they were getting worried. Because my water had broken a long time ago. She was talking to Carla about transporting me to the hospital. And I remember I was in the bathroom because I was trying to push. I was told to push too early as opposed to just connecting to my own, But that was my first delivery, because with William, I had never gone into labor. I had the C-section, so I didn't even know what it meant to labor or how that felt. So I was pushing when it was way too early to push, so I was exhausted, right? 30 hours, that's over a day. That's over a full day. So, but anyhow, I remember going and sitting on the toilet. And this is a message for anybody who maybe doesn't know how to push. Well, I knew how to push on a toilet, right? So I went and I sat on the toilet, and I remember I was just ready to give up. I could hear them out there talking about transport. The midwife was talking about transporting me. And I yelled at her. I told her, I can hear you. I don't need people giving up on me. And yeah, it's important to, anyhow, in whatever you do, to hire a team that believes in you and you feel held and supported. But anyhow, that wasn't her fault. She was just, anyhow. So I remember Denise looked at me and she said, look, this baby's going to be born here. I've seen it. Okay, and this baby's going to be born here. And after that, I just sat on that toilet and I started pushing, and then she started yelling for them to come in because she got her flashlight. I think she got her flashlight, or maybe she didn't have them, but I remember she looked and she's like, I can see the baby's head, let's go. And then from there, I just moved, sat on the floor, and I birthed my second son. And I remember looking in his eyes, and it was just love at first sight. Love at first sight with all my children, I looked at him and I'm like, he gave me so much power and so much strength. But that was a really traumatic birth. I hemorrhaged right after that severely, and I had to be transported to the hospital. And I feel really bad because it's really, it's time and time again, I had the endorphins. It's like I was fine, but it's my husband, right? I always think of the man and the husband and him not having the support he needs. Like with our first son, I was in the hospital after I gave birth to our son. I think I was in the hospital for like 1 to 2 weeks, and nobody brings meals for the husband. I mean, maybe there's a pullout, maybe not. Maybe you're sharing a room with somebody else. Like it's just like it's just not a good setup. It's really not a good setup. So, but anyhow, so then I was stabilized at the hospital, and then I think already by the next day I came home, and with all 3 of my kids, I was going to say with both of them, but with all 3 of my kids, I have an Ayurvedic program, like a postpartum program that I followed, because there are 3 openings in a woman's life. Okay, the time she gets married, they're like portals. The time she gets married, after she has a baby. The time she gets married, when she has a baby, and menopause. And they're these like portals of time, energetic portals, where you can really like revitalize yourself. And that hand in hand, I'm a sociologist, right? So reading all the studies, and a psychologist, reading all these studies of like a marital satisfaction greatly declining right after the birth of a baby, or like right after the birth of the baby, right? Or shortly thereafter, and just continuing like that. That's a very normal pattern in North America. And, you know, lack of postpartum support, all of that, depression, postpartum depression, all of that. I'm like, I don't want that to be my story. And it's not going to be my story. And so I just like dove into this Ayurvedic program. And I'm so grateful because my friends were actually like Ayurvedic practitioners. And it was like a baby in me program. And they graciously generously shared the info from that program. They actually gave me a teacher's manual. I don't know if they were supposed to, but anyhow, so I applied it to myself. And I had my husband and my mother-in-law first like sneak food into the hospital for me. And I remember the nurses were pissed because I didn't want all their pain meds. And I remember they were even calling me a martyr. And because they wanted me on these they wanted me to be taking like codeine laced, you know, Tylenol 3s. And I get it. I had an incision. But I didn't want that transferring to my baby. And I don't care what people say. I think that stuff does. I think that stuff goes through the milk, and I didn't want that through to the milk. I wanted to, so I didn't take a lot of pain meds, and I had gained a lot of weight with our first son, and the weight did start coming off. It started coming off. I had a special diet, Ayurvedic diet. I didn't eat the hospital food. I ate this diet, and the weight started coming off, and I felt loved, you know, and but all the weight didn't come off, just so you know, and it actually didn't come off after my second son. It didn't come off till years after my second son. So if that's you, have grace with yourself, especially if you're nursing. Like my second son, right? So I came home, I recovered, and it's like, I call it Queen for a month. And I started actually writing a program that I need to finish, but it's like Queen for a month. And you're a queen for a month. That traditionally, it's actually that 40 days of just resting and elation and body work, having somebody come in, having meals prepared for you. And I also recognize that not everybody has the means for that. But there are creative ways to get around that, because, you know, with our third son, what I actually did was, when people asked me about a baby shower, I said, I don't want a baby shower. I just want people to bring me food for a week, or I think we did for 2 weeks. And just my friends organized themselves, and somebody was dropping food off at my house every day. And that food was actually more for my family than for me, to take that pressure off my husband, because I wasn't eating that food. I had that special diet, prescribed diet that I was doing. And so that was our second son. But I also knew, like, after our second son was born, I knew I would be going back to work shortly after that. And I knew I had to figure our shit out. Like, I really did, like, house-wise, right? Because because the more kids you bring on, especially after our second son, like, I saw, I just needed to figure things out. So the first thing that woke me up, before I kind of, like, overhauled the whole house, the first thing that woke me up was my wardrobe. Because what happened was, I remember I had a nursing baby, second baby, plus I've got a 2-year-old toddler. And I remember, you know, you kind of get, after a while, you kind of feel like you're going stir crazy. Carlos like, hey babe, you want to go out for dinner? And I'm like, I would love to. Bringing the kids, let's go to town. Putting on my good slippers, let's go to town. That's the joke around here. But anyhow, I remember reaching in my closet and nothing fit. Nothing made me feel good. The things that fit, I felt frumpy in. And like 30 minutes later, he's still waiting. And you know, when you've got a toddler and a nursing newborn, 30 minutes can feel like a lifetime, especially to the partner who's supporting you, who's not able to feed the nursing baby, right? So I knew that that's something I had to figure out. So the first thing I figured out was my capsule wardrobe. And I did that with the help of a great book written by Jennifer L. Scott. It's called Lessons from Madame Chic. I think it's something like 20 Lessons I Learned While Living in Paris. And I just love that book. And the reason I love that book was, it's a simple, quick read. And I loved it because it actually reminded me of my time growing up in Europe and having more of a capsule wardrobe. And we didn't call it capsule wardrobes. It was more, I think the situation really dictated how we lived. You know, we didn't have these walk-in closets. You had an armoire, and you didn't have a huge wardrobe. You had smaller wardrobe, but it was high quality pieces that you would wear in heavy rotation, right? So it reminded me to go back to that, so I did. And then I stuck with that for a while, and then it wasn't until, and then also because of the client we were working with, and they're heavy into like food preparedness, and also because of where we live on the island, there was this there were these heavy rainstorms, and the road to access our little town from both sides, the road washed out and we were trapped inside. And they were talking about like airlifting us out, and that really woke us up to taking food preparedness seriously. Okay, so we're minimalist, or we try to be like minimalist and practice food minimalism, but the one area that we don't practice it in, and it's by design, is food storage. Food storage is, we actually want to have food, and there's a specific way of doing it, and I talk about that as well in my Sacred Space free online program. So you can find that again on my website, www.thrivs.com. It's called Sacred Space. You can sign up for it there. But that's when we figured out the food part. And then after our third son was born, I knew I needed to get my crap together, definitely. And that's when everybody else in the family got a capsule wardrobe, starting with the baby, then my sons, and then my husband. He just decided to do it on his own. Like, I don't. You leave the husband alone, is what I say. Like, you know, you're aspiring to rise and step into your divine feminine, and you're inviting him to rise and meet you there in his divine masculine. Okay, he does not need to be micromanaged or disempowered or demasculated, right? So my husband, Carlo, he adopted one as well. And then I started purging and creating sacred space within our home, like closet to closet, drawer to drawer, okay? And then we also dealt with all the toy clutter. We implemented a system for grocery shopping and all of that. And all of that just created so much spaciousness in our life, and allowed our life to flow. Okay. So, and then when my oldest was 4, you know, I started looking for schools, and the reality set in. And I started asking neighbors, you know, especially ones with kids, especially when I saw a family that I felt was thriving, I would ask them, hey, where do you send your child to school? Where do you send your child to school? Where do you send? And the answer that kept coming over and over and over was, we homeschool, we homeschool, we homeschool. And I thought, crap, okay, yet again, something different, something outside of the norm, you know, that, you know, we were already that. It's that granola crunchy, even though that's the funny thing about us, you know, it's like, just because I wear a YSL purse, you know, people don't realize just how crunchy we are, you know, like placenta encapsulating, home birthing, non-vaccinating, you know, and a lot of that stuff, it's funny, a lot of that stuff is just a lot more mainstream now, but it definitely wasn't back then. Like, it really wasn't. I remember, you know, having pediatricians like outright, I don't want to say kick me out of their practice, right? But like just flat out tell me they cannot see us anymore. So, but it just led to meeting people and meeting practitioners that were better aligned with us. So in the end, it was great. Like, it was the right thing, but at the time it didn't feel great at all. So then we started homeschooling, or we decided we were going to homeschool, but I still wasn't sure how I felt about it and what we were going to do. So Carla and I had started talking about it, and so what we ended up doing was Carla ended up going to like this like Keiki, like a kids kind of swap meet garage sale thing at like the Children Discovery Center, and somebody there was selling 2 boxes of homeschooling curriculum. It was Calvert, And it was like kindergarten and grade 1. And Carlo's like, should I just get it? And I'm like, sure, just get it. I think he paid like $50 or something for the 2 boxes, which is a steal because, as you know, like homeschooling curriculums are like in the upwards of thousands of dollars, like, you know, 1,000 to 2,000 per year, right? Excuse me. So anyhow, so he came home with this curriculum and we thought, okay, we're going to test drive it. Sorry, William. We decided to test drive it on our oldest. We're like, okay, he's ready for it. And he was also like a late birthday, so he wasn't eligible to start. So we're like, you know what? He's ready for it. He's a very kind of still child. I meditated so much, and he was in my belly when I was pregnant at ashrams a lot. So he sat in that space, and he's just kind of very chill, very calm. I don't know if that's why, or maybe I was chill, calm. I don't know, but he's super chill. So I thought, like, he's the type that he could sit and you just give him something and he does it, and he just does what he's told, which is good. And not good, right, as you know. But for him, I think, as a person, right, it's not good to be so. Anyhow, so we did it. It went well. So the next year we decided to do it again and officially do kindergarten with him. And then we just continued from there. And he's now a senior, and he's applying to colleges. So, and then second one added him. Did the 2 of them while having the baby. And I will tell you, definitely my breath work and meditation practice got me through. Because when you've got 2 pretty active boys and then you've got a baby and you're trying to homeschool them and you're working, because I was still working through all of this. Yeah, life can feel a little bananas, and it did. So it was out of all of that my Sacred Space program was born. And it wasn't born until like 2 years ago or a year ago. You know, I've kind of been adding to it, but everything that's in it is what I was practicing in order for us as a family to feel like we were more than just surviving, you know what I mean? And that we were thriving, really. And then our third son was kind of added to the mix, you know, and we lived here, we left, we traveled, we've come back. We lived in Canada for a year and then came back. And I had a miscarriage in between there. You know, I lost a baby. I was like 2 to 3 months along, and that was really, it was sad. It was sad, and that was before my third was born. So then my third was born. Awesome home birth. It was like coming home. It was like that healing home birth that I needed. And the other thing I wanted to share before I share that with you is that I had this interesting experience of I was pregnant with our third son. Okay, I got pregnant in Hawaii, but we weren't living in Hawaii at the time. We were actually living in Canada. We were consulting for the University of Montreal, and we flew back to Hawaii for a wedding. So I hadn't been able to get pregnant at all in Canada. Flew back to Hawaii. Within a few days, I got pregnant. Flew back to Canada, continued to consult. And then when I would visit the town where I was abused, okay, my hometown where I had been sexually abused as a child, I started bleeding in my pregnancy. And I started like spotting, and we had everything checked out. Baby got checked out. Baby was cruising in there. He was cruising. I was okay, and they couldn't really explain it. So they just told me to rest. They just told me to put my feet up and rest, so I did. And the bleeding never stopped. It was more like a spotting, but it never stopped because we were there just getting situated for like a few weeks, like 3-4 weeks, until we moved back to Hawaii after this big contract. And I will tell you, within 2 days of arriving back on Oahu, just feeling the security and the true residence of this island within me, that the bleeding stopped. I carried baby to 40 weeks, which was a lot for my short torso. He was my biggest baby, you know, and and I had this amazing home birth. I remember I went into labor, and I was and we were watching like Die Hard 4 or something, Carlo and I. And as soon as I realized I was in labor, I thought, okay, I'm gonna go and start eating to like pack on the calories, pack on the energy. I just started eating peanut butter out of a jar. And I told Carlo, I said, okay, I think baby might be born tonight. I called my midwife. She said, go upstairs and rest. I tried resting, couldn't, okay? And I came downstairs and it was pretty painful. But I remember saying to myself, don't be freaking out. Hey son, I'm just recording a video, okay? What's that? Okay. And I said to myself, okay, you better take it easy because you remember how long the last one was, so you better get your shit together and just like grin and bear it and just try to get through it. And I would like rock on the ergo ball, and then Carlo would run back and forth. And that was the difference too. I was scared because Denise had moved away and I didn't have anybody. Like I tried looking for like a doula and just nothing clicked. So the midwives were coming, but they wouldn't come until I was in active labor. So I remember calling them, and when they realized I was in active labor, my midwife was like, she's my doctor also, my family doctor. She's a naturopathic doctor, Dr. Lori Kimata, if you're on island. And she said, okay, I'm on my way. She realized I was in active labor, and she was on her way. And in the meantime, I was just kind of trying to get through it. And I'm like, okay, I was just talking to myself. I'm like, you better keep it together because this might still be like a really, I think she had already known, but maybe I didn't know. I think that's my point, is she knew to come, but I still didn't realize how far along I was. So I'm like, okay, you better just keep it together. And Carlo kept going back and forth between our office, or like in our home, the downstairs room that was an office at the same time. He kept going between that and running to the kitchen. And I didn't know where he was going, and I kept getting pissed off. I'm like, my contractions are pretty close apart. Like, why in the world does he keep disappearing? And I realized later it was because he was like watching a YouTube video, trying to figure out how to like set up and fill up the birthing tub. Because you don't set the birthing tub up ahead of time, right? Because it's not gonna, you don't know when you're gonna go into labor, and you don't want that thing sitting in your kitchen or in your dining room for weeks, right? So anyhow, so he was inflating it and he was filling it up with water. And in Hawaii, we have small water tanks. They're like half the size of a regular one for most people, right? And so he would have to like fill it up and then turn off the water, wait for it to heat up again, right? So he kept running back and forth. Anyway, but then when I did have my contraction and I would call for him, he would come. And it was so beautiful because nobody else was there. It was just him and I, and Denise was not there to rescue me. He had to do it and I had to do it. And it really made us bond even more so as a couple. And I just like danced. I had my arms around his neck, and he just applied counter pressure to me. And, you know, either I was facing him or I had my back to him, and he was doing counter pressure, and we got through it. And before I knew it, I think my body, so I wasn't pushing. I didn't even know to push. I didn't think I was far enough along to push. My body, this is the most incredible thing, my body started wringing itself. It felt like what my body was doing is the same as if you took a towel and you like spun it, right? And you like started wringing it. That's what my body was doing. My body was just the torso, and like from like here to the hips, it was like it was just turning itself, and the baby was just being pushed down. And when Dr. Lori arrived, ready to go, all in her black getup, her headlamp, we knew she meant business. Carlos said when she showed up, because we'd never seen her dressed in black or with a headlamp, right? He's like, I knew she meant business. She just showed up and she looked and she's like, wow, okay, you're ready to have this baby. And it was really incredible because compared to 30 hours of labor, it's like this one, I went into labor, I went into labor at like shortly before 10 o'clock, and it was around 10, I think, or maybe, yeah. And baby was born before 2, so it was like less than 4 hours. And our other boys, like, and this was my deep wish as well, is I didn't want a lot of like fuss, a lot of drama. What I wanted was for my older boys to be asleep, because with my second son's birth, my first son was over at our neighbors for like a couple of days, and I didn't like that. So this time, my older two boys, they were just sleeping up in their rooms, and then when they heard me like scream, because as the baby I think came out, they popped their heads out and they saw baby, and he was just, yeah, he just came out in the birthing tub, but they had asked me to stand up. So I stood up, and they said, "Are you able to pull him out yourself?" And it was really beautiful. They were just very hands off, because at this point a second midwife had arrived. And like, funny story is that the second midwife that arrived, I heard Dr. Lori saying to her, "Where are you?" Because she's already sounding really pushy, and she had trouble finding our place because it was dark. But I remember when she arrived, the second midwife, so she was very sweet and very supportive, and she was in my face as I was in the tub. She was trying to get me to slow down my breathing and stop pushing so much, and to give my body a chance to adapt for the baby to descend and minimize tearing. But I remember looking at her and going, "Wow, it's like 2 a.m. or it's 1 a.m. You've got like a full set of makeup on." I'm like, "Is that why you're late? Were you like doing your makeup?" She's very beautiful, but I was like, "Wait a minute." Anyhow, so baby was born, and then we just rested. I had like minimal tearing, just a couple of stitches, which I wish I hadn't, but I had a couple of stitches, and then it was just really nice. We just bonded as a family. The midwives just quietly removed themselves to the back of my house to the studio, and they just chilled there, and once in a while they would come, they would check on us, making sure the bleeding was in check, and that everything was good, and then they would remove themselves, and we just nursed baby, and it was just really, really beautiful time, a beautiful bonding time. And I feel like that's how a birth should be, that the attendants should be there if needed, but that they can just kind of fall into the background and allow the family to start bonding and attaching. And maybe that's, I'm like well attached with all 3 of my children, and I just really parent them with intention and with love, and we spend as much time with them as possible without suffocating them or ourselves. That's why we're so, that's why for a long time we were really, big on the date night, to make sure that Carla and I are connected, because we've been together for, I think it's been 29 years, which just sounds crazy when I say it, but it just went like that. It doesn't feel like 29 years. And yeah, and our boys are just getting older, and I feel like we're just thriving. And I think that's where I'll end the story today.